I have always voted against the televising of the proceedings of this House. And I expect that I always will.
Do you remember this? November the 21st, 1989, and a speech by the Conservative MP Ian Gow. He was making a bit of parliamentary and broadcasting history, delivering the first ever televised speech from the House of Commons. He was proposing what's known as the Loyal Address, the traditional thank you by MPs to the Queen for the legislation that's contained in the Queen's speech, which opens each new session of Parliament. That's extraordinary, really, that it took so long for the cameras to get into the Commons. After all, we'd been hearing MPs on radio for quite some time, and the Lords had beaten the Commons by several years in their decision to let the cameras into their chamber. Of course, even when the cameras did get into the Commons chamber, many MPs remained deeply unhappy about the whole thing. They only agreed at first to let them in for a limited period and on an experimental basis. 10 years on, it's hard to think that democracy was kept in the dark for so long. And the whole operation certainly changed the way that MPs regard television, and I think it probably changed the way that we regard our MPs. So, welcome to 10 years of MP TV.
It's rather like sending your opening batsman to the crease, only for them to find, the moment the first balls are bowled, that their bats have been broken before the game by the team captain.
No, no, no.
We give the impression of being in office, but not in power.
Crime passionnel is out of the question, and negligee will make a liaison dangereuse a little risky.
I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying this.
Of course, MP TV has had the effect of focusing attention on the one person who keeps the whole show going. That's the Speaker, and especially since 1992 when she took up the office on Madam Speaker, Betty Boothroyd. She's become quite a television star in her own right. And indeed, I'm told that in America and Japan, there's something of a cult following for her. Anyway, I went into Speaker's house to talk to Madam Speaker about it all. Madam Speaker, you have to sit and listen to probably more parliamentary speeches than any other person on earth. Mm-hmm. So what do you think actually makes what you would call a good parliamentary speech?
A lot of work goes into it, a lot of application. For backbenchers, it's as well for them to decide on 3 areas they want to cover, or 4 at the most, work hard at it, get their speech down to 10 or 12 minutes, and then it's rather a good one, and the House listens. But you can't do anything without a lot of good homework first.
So they've got to sit down, think about it. It's not good hoping that you can get up on your hind legs.
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, there may be, throughout history, no doubt have been a handful of people who could do that. But on the whole, for the vast majority of us, there's no doubt about it, that application is the most important thing.
Do you think the behaviour of MPs has changed at all since the arrival of the cameras?
I don't think so. I think in the early days when we had cameras in the chamber, undoubtedly it was unique, it was a newness. And then members played to the camera, and I remember what was called donutting, when colleagues came and sat around so that they could also be on camera. I don't know how long that happened for, but members soon got used to cameras in this house because they are very unobtrusive. I don't notice them as Speaker at all. I never think that we're on camera. And of course they're remote controlled. And I think after a time members got used to it. And I think this new intake of members, which came in 2 years ago, I think they came in not terribly conscious of the cameras because of course they'd seen the House on television and it was all part and parcel of their working day.
But do you think perhaps they are aware now that they're speaking to a greater audience than just the chamber?
I hope so. I hope they know that they're speaking to the public of this country and overseas too, because I was always in favour of bringing cameras into the chamber to make our work here as transparent as possible for those who send us here. So I hope they're speaking also to the public outside as well as to their own colleagues in the House. I'm very much in favour of cameras in the chamber and, very importantly too, in select committees. I want the public to see what we do here.
So, in a sense, the arrival of the cameras 10 years ago was a step forward democratically.
Very much so. I think it helps the democratic process.
And yet, some of them, of course, hated it when they first came in. And some of them, I suspect, still secretly hate it.
I don't know. Maybe they secretly hate it, but no one reports to me that they don't like the cameras. I could name the people, and I'm not going to. In the early days when we had votes on whether we should televise the House or not, there were some very vociferous people who were opposed to it. But I would have thought that now it's padded down and everybody's accustomed to it.
Do you notice at all any difference in the Speaker's job because they're perhaps on camera, or has it made not the slightest difference
It
at all?
hasn't made the slightest difference to them at all. I mean, the House is still as robust as it's ever been. It is not difficult to keep order in that House. I mean, one lets them have their say and noises from sedentary positions for a little while, and then you've probably seen me stand up and say, enough. Sometimes I mention a member's name, House falls silent. You give them a little bit of rope, that's all right. I don't think that it's changed at all because of the cameras there.
Because I think one of the things we notice is, in a sense, how the Speaker operates, how you operate. Sometimes a look can kill.
I hope so. That's what I intend, that it should be like that. And of course we have some guidelines here for the broadcasters, is that if it does get too noisy or rowdy, and I don't think I've ever had that experience, I know full well that once I stand, the cameras move to the chair. They move away from the chamber itself. But I don't ever have to do that, because I hope with a little look here or a side glance there or a murmur here that I can do the job.
Though on occasions I recall that you've said, I am on my feet.
I am on, yes, of course. Resume your seat, I am on my feet.
And that's almost the ultimate sanction.
The ultimate. And then I see colleagues pulling the coat-tails of whoever is there to sit down. You know, she's at it again, sit down.
What would you say of all the speeches that you've heard is the one that sticks most in your mind?
You know, speeches come in all shapes and sizes and flavours. And there have been very good speeches on Kosovo, on Iraq, Iran, on Bosnia, on Northern Ireland. But I think perhaps the most impressive speech that I recall was the one made by Robin Cook when he was in opposition, when he had mastered in a very short space of time the Scott Report on arms to Iraq. And I think that was a very impressive performance by any standard.
Now, one of the great Commons occasions is when there's a change of Speaker, when a new Speaker is elected, and that's rather an unusual occasion, isn't it?
It's most unusual and very nerve-wracking, actually, I tell you. I was as nervous as a kitten. I sat there on the opposition benches, and I knew what I was going to say. So I'd worked on the speech for a long time, and I thought, it's never going to come my turn. Everybody else was popping out and saying who they wanted, and some of them endorsing my candidature, and my palms were getting sweaty. It was a very nerve-wracking experience, but once one gets started in a speech, all the nerves go. You know, whoever it is, you have to produce your very best, because if you don't, you're letting yourself down. And I did the best I could, and it worked out well.
And then we have this strange tradition that you are dragged to the chair.
Yes, well, as you know why that is, so many of my predecessors, it was off with their heads. So although you have to show us reluctance, no, not me. After you've been fighting very hard to get there, you do this, no, not me, thank you very much. I remember what happened hundreds of years ago. But I remember it very vividly. It was a spring day, and the sun shining through the high windows of the chamber, that spring sunshine coming in, and being dragged to the chair, and then to make my few comments before I took the chair. It was a very remarkable occasion, one, of course, I'm never likely to forget.
days when there's a really big occasion in the Commons, this, the St Stephen's entrance, is where you'll see members of the public queuing up and trying to get in to secure one of the fairly limited places in the public gallery which overlooks the Commons chamber. But of course now with MP TV, any of us can see what's actually going on days like that. Days, for example, when the budget is presented, or when that long debate, which traditionally follows the Queen's speech at the start of each session, gets underway. Now, tradition dictates that that debate is opened up by two backbenchers, one usually a young rising star and the other an older seasoned hand. And also by tradition, that's an occasion when they often inject a very welcome note of humour into their speeches.
Order! Order, Mr. Ian Gyles.
Mr. Speaker, I have always voted against the televising of the proceedings of this House. And I expect that I always will, despite the strongly held opinions which I have on these matters. I received a letter 3 weeks ago. I believe that a copy was sent to each of us and possibly even to you, Mr. Speaker, which made the following preposterous assertion, and I quote, "The impression you make on television depends mainly on your image, 55%, with your voice and body language accounting for 38% of your impact. Only 7% depends on what you are actually saying."
Being elected in 1983, in somewhat a surprised form, with a less than generous majority of 74 votes, the first day at Westminster was an occasion which I'm sure all members of this House will agree you simply never forget. With a majority that small, who is to say what quite tipped the balance? But I have to admit that the day before the election, there was a showing on television of my father's film, The Blue Lamp, which was the old Archie-type, Bobby on the Beat type movie. Now, perhaps it helped, who can tell? But when I went in through the St Stephen's entrance on the day to take the oath, as the first time as the member for Richmond and Barnes, the policeman on the door said, "Mr. Hanley, I'm very sorry that your late father isn't around to see you come into this house, sir. I think he'd have been very proud." I said, "Well, thank you, Sergeant, that's very kind." He said, "Mind you, sir, I think the shock might have killed him." And it's that absolutely true. I'm sure honourable and right honourable members have noted those smiles which play on the face of the constabulary in this Palace of Westminster. I mean, could it be the confidence of a job well done, or more likely the fact that whatever the result of the next election, they'll be back?
The honourable member for Richmond and Barnes was a complete delight, and I'm sure that everybody in the House would agree with that. He has certain advantages. He is, of course, the son of distinguished actors, both of whom rightly command admiration, and he gave evidence of that in recounting his encounter with the honourable and reverend gentleman from Northern Ireland. I had a not dissimilar encounter when I shared an office in those halcyon days when there were mixed parties in offices, and they didn't come any more mixed than the honourable and reverend gentleman. I was caught by him on one occasion giving a rather bad impersonation of his accent. And he said I wasn't to worry about that because impersonation was the sincerest form of flattery. But he added, "Not that I believe in flattery, of course."
Gyles Brandreth.
Madam Speaker, I'm only here because I have the unique good fortune to represent the city of Chester. Quite simply, the finest place there is. 2,000 years of matchless history. Yes. not quite right. 1,101. I was sponsored by a carpet shampoo firm, and I have declared it. The joy of being a member for a marginal seat is that it keeps you on your toes, as the honourable gentleman will discover in due course. I have to tell him I wouldn't stand anywhere else if they asked me, and they have. I'm thrilled to play my tiny part, however brief, in the 2,000 years of matchless history of Chester. A Roman fortress, a cradle of our monarchy, the last city in the land to fall to the Norman conquest, a bastion for the crown in the Civil War. Indeed, with our historic walls, our fabulous roads, our beautiful river, our ancient cathedral, our theatre, our galleries, our gem of a racecourse, our model zoo, we're the jewel in any crown. No wonder the James Boswell, we call James Boswell, Madam Speaker, the Alan Clarke of his day, possibly more reliable. No wonder he thought Chester the fairest English city I have seen. Candidly, I cannot claim a lot of personal credit for the glories of my constituency, though I do try. Colleagues may be shocked to hear this, but whenever there's a bit of good news going in my part of the world, I do my best to get in on the act. At least I've learnt something from the Liberals. I plan to welcome the gracious speech. I believe the Leader of the Opposition plans to be more critical. Indeed, I know what his plans are, because one of his more innocent spin doctors gave me a detailed preview of his speech under the misapprehension that I was Robin Oakley.
I greatly commend him on his speech. I mean absolutely no offence either when I say that I greeted the end of his speech with some relief, since I gather he holds the world record for after-dinner speaking. It is recorded that he spoke for 12 hours and 32 minutes, though sadly it's not recorded how many of the audience stayed to the end of it. The honourable member came to this house with a great reputation for loudness, and indeed that was only his sweaters. He also runs a teddy bear shop, so I understand, in Stratford. So, Madam Speaker, who says there is not sufficient diversity of experience in the House today? He's also past winner, so I am told, of the World Monopoly Championships, so no doubt there is a place on the board of the utilities waiting for him. And more important, he is the author of a book called Great Sexual Disasters. The remarkable thing, I may say, is that it's written before he came to this house. So I've no doubt at all that a sequel is well on its way.
Mr. Gerald Kaufman.
Yeah. Madam Speaker, you will recall that yesterday evening I asked if you would allow me to sing while I was moving this motion today. Having made inquiries about my vocal abilities, you strictly forbade me to do so, thus demonstrating the solicitude for right honourable and honourable members which ensured your unopposed election last week. Accordingly, I am precluded from treating the House to prolonged extracts from the musical Hello, Dolly, which I had intended to sing. I must therefore confine myself simply to the following. Hello, Tony. Hello, Johnny. It's so nice to see you back where you belong. Madam Speaker, this is the first speech I have made from this side of the House for more than 18 years, and it is my first speech ever as a government backbencher. I am therefore going to be unprecedentedly and quite possibly unrepeatedly loyal. Indeed, let me immediately dispel any doubts that malicious people may have propagated. It is my firm intention to speak in favour of this Queen's speech. The first I heard that I'd been selected to move this motion was a telephone call that came for me on Monday afternoon. And a portentously official-sounding voice said, in ominous tones, the government chief whip would like to speak to you. Immediately, I was struck with terror that I had violated the Parliamentary Labour Party's new and extremely stringent code of discipline. My mind went back guiltily to a general election campaign meeting last month, in which I had been reckless enough to utter the word socialism. Moreover, I had shared the platform with a trade union leader. I knew I could not hope for leniency in the light of such transgressions. However, it turned out that my fears were groundless, and that my right honourable friend was inviting me to move the motion to which I am now speaking. I therefore cast around in my mind for some explanation for my being singled out in this way. I want to make clear, Madam Speaker, that in order to obtain this distinction, I did not send boxes of chocolates or bunches of... to either the Prime Minister or the Chief Whip. Nor did I invite them out to dinner. Apart from anything else, on a backbencher's salary, I cannot afford the prices. I cannot afford the prices at Granita. Nor have I ever said that there is something of the night about the Chief Whip. Even if I thought it. I recall that recently, during a broadcast in a Radio 4 programme, which was appropriately called Loose Ends, I announced myself to be a total sycophant of the Prime Minister. However, before preening myself too much, I do realise that under the iron heel of the Minister without portfolio, my honourable friend, the member for Hartlepool, total sycophancy must be regarded as a suspiciously lukewarm form.
This month, I will have been in this house 30 years, and I came in on Guy Fawkes Day 1968. In 1968 was very, very similar situation to what we have now. It was 2 years after a Labour government had come in, which then had a majority of 99. We had a character on our side then. It was just before the Honourable Member for Bolsover came in, who used to do the same job as the Honourable Member for Bolsover does now. And that was Willie Hamilton. And he got fed up of all the debates, and he had a bright idea of how to tame them. He simply outed all the noble families. He took all the nobles and read through their family trees and said what a bunch of villains and rogues they'd been, who had made money from the slave trade and sending kids down the pit, whose great granny was a bimbo at the Brighton Pavilion. It got to the stage inside a week the Lords were queuing up to set a Willie, they would vote for anything. Providing he didn't mention that Lloyd George didn't know their father, he knew their mother and sisters as well. It was the time Rupert Murdoch had just bought the News of the World. He never had to print any sleaze on Sunday. He just printed Willie Hamilton's speeches every Sunday until they were begging for mercy. We have the same situation today. A limbo situation down there with the EC elections. Absolute chaos. Candidates not knowing whether they're in or out or whatever. And Willie stood up and said the same thing then. If you remember, there were proposals to go in the EC and big chunks on that side were against it, big chunks for it, same on this side. And Willie Hamilton, in exasperation, stood up and said, "This is crazy. This is absolute chaos. This is not the politics of Europe. It's the politics of coitus interruptus." And a little voice shouted, "Withdraw!" 30 years ago, there was a song Tom Jones was singing. It shows you how old he is, doesn't it? But it's called What's New Pussycat? Now we're getting down to just a few pussycats of the old Labour who are still in the place. There's me and Honourable Member for Bolsover and Honourable Member for Chesterfield. I'm looking at 3 neighbouring constituencies coming here reminiscing about old Labour. And it's a bit like the last of the summer Labour, last of the summer wine. Rumpole, Fogate and Clegg. Spend our time reminiscing that Wall Street will crash, just like the Berlin Wall crashed down, but Bill Clinton always bounces free. I'll close by saying this, Madam Speaker. This year now, there's another song which has been very popular. It comes from the film called The Full Monty, which many, many people will have seen in the House and right round the world. That film starts off with a scene in a canal where the unemployed steel workers are standing on a car in the canal trying to steal scrap and make a bit of money. And that scene was shot at Bacon Lane Bridge in Attercliffe. It's 200 yards from where I was born and 300 yards from where I started work at the age of 15. And they sing the song in that film, I Believe in Miracles. Yeah. And I want to say that 30 years later, my honourable friends on the front bench are achieving it. The new jobs, there are new jobs for the derelict areas and the derelict pit sites in my constituency. There's a brighter future than what there's been for years for the workers and families in those areas from the Full Monty. And I'd like to congratulate the whole of our front bench as an old Labour stalwart. The miracle has arrived.
Yeah. We can see who the winners and the losers are round the cabinet table. The winners have got a bill. The losers have got a draft bill. The real losers have got their proposals taken forward. The completely defeated have got a consultation paper, and for those who've got nothing at all, at least there's a consolation of being Deputy Prime Minister. Here he is. Where is the integrated transport strategy? Where's it got to? Deputy Prime Minister sitting here, he can no doubt tell us. Back in July, it was he who was telling us that after 20 years in the wilderness, this is the day transport policy bursts out into the light of a new dawn. He said doing nothing was not an option. Well, clearly doing nothing is an option, because there he is, busy doing nothing. He's the Secretary of State for the Environment, Transport, the Secretary of State for Environment, Transport and the Regions. There's nothing in the Queen's speech about the environment. There's nothing about transport except a shadow rail authority, and nothing for the regions except what we've already done. What's the point of having an integrated transport policy when he can't even integrate it into the government's programme? But he's never been one for nursing a grievance quietly, so he can get up and tell us all about it whenever he wants. But at least people with a Jaguar can breathe a sigh of relief that his crazy anti-car proposals are stuck in a lay-by. And those with 2 Jags can breathe 2 sighs of relief. He needn't look so grumpy. He and his friend, the Right Honourable Member for Yeovil, can always form a club of people who give unquestioning support to the Prime Minister but get precious little in return. Not one of the bills in this Queen's speech addresses any of the pressing priorities of the British people, and that is especially true of the one bill which I suspect will dominate this session. One bill which is going to hang like a millstone round the Prime Minister's neck, that shows so clearly that this government is more interested in fiddling with our constitution than with addressing the real priorities of the British people. Now, the government has set up a royal commission. He thought it was an independent second chamber when it defeated the last government. He used to congratulate it, said it was a victory for common sense. Now, they've set up a royal commission to consider alternatives to the present House of Lords. It will report in just 2 years' time. So why is he going to waste the whole of the coming year on a piece of constitutional vandalism which will be obsolescent in 24 months? All sensible people want to wait for the Royal Commission. They're not prepared to embark on reform of the House of Lords until they see where this government is going to it. They don't want stage 1 without stage 2. The reason why the Prime Minister doesn't want to wait for the Royal Commission is very clear. He's never had any intention of carrying out proper reform of the Lords. He wants to create a house of cronies beholden to him and to him alone. We know what his vision of the future is. Lord Draper of Lobbygate, Lord Robinson of offshore funds, Lord Mandelson of Rio, and the Prime Minister himself, Baron of Ideas.
Order, order. Mrs. Gwyneth Dunwoody.
Mr. Heath, this is a truly beautiful day. The sun is shining, God is in his heaven, and I'm happy to see a majority of the House of Commons wearing the right colours. Can I... Because indeed, the lady that I have the honour to propose as Speaker of this August House fought a very unique election, wearing a green rosette. And it is very rarely that one has the opportunity to introduce to one's colleagues, so many of them new to this House, a person of such sterling value and of such remarkable ability. There will be many of you who think you know our Speaker, many of you who have come here perhaps for the first time today, and you will know her public persona. You will know this witty, hard-hitting, very much in charge Yorkshire woman who keeps us all in our place. That is, of course, what she does. But however, you ought to know that behind that public persona, there is another person. And she is much valued by the House of Commons on all sides and by all members. She is a woman who understands not only our abilities but our frailties. She is a woman who, unlike some of you, I have to say, only got here after 5 attempts. She has served this House now for what seems to me a very short time. But she has done so with intelligence, with ability, and with remarkable tolerance. She understands, because she's been in our whip's office, what every trick and particular change we can make in order to get what we want. She understands how the procedures of our House are important, and although sometimes arcane, actually contribute to the importance of free speech. Above all, she is the person who protects that free speech, because to her, the importance of the House of Commons is its ability to speak for the people, its ability to be the voice of the people, and above all, its ability to represent the people. I have to say simply, Mr. Heath, that you and I have seen 1 or 2 summers, but we 21-year-olds know how to appreciate the important things of life. It is therefore, to me, a really great privilege and indeed a great honour to propose to the House of Commons that its Speaker be the Honourable Betty Boothroyd, MP for West Bromwich.
Mr. John MacGregor.
The last time I met the Right Honourable Lady, the member for West Bromwich West, was just before the dissolution of the last Parliament, when we were together late at night in very convivial circumstances,
Keep going.
arm in arm,
It's getting better.
in a chorus line, singing "We'll Meet Again." Little did I think then, and more of that later, but little did I think then that I would be meeting her again, with me having the great pleasure and privilege of seconding the proposal that she should again be our Speaker. And it is indeed a great pleasure and privilege. I would like really just to make 3 points. First, those of us who were in the last Parliament know already her many sterling qualities, which is why she is the unanimous choice, without the need for any election, of all of us as the Speaker in this Parliament. There is no greater honour that the House can bestow upon one of its number than accepting them as Speaker of this House. It is a role which is so important in upholding our democratic traditions. But it is no easy task, and in having the great pleasure to second the Right Honourable Lady as Speaker of this House, I'm sure that I speak for everyone in wishing her well in doing the job in this Parliament.
Call on Miss Betty Boothroyd.
Sir Edward, some honourable members were not even born when you entered the Commons. The present Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer are only two of them. You have seen 7 previous speakers occupy that chair, and now, as the 8th, I submit myself in accordance with the ancient custom, once again, to the will of this House. 10 years ago, this summer, I vividly remember hearing my immediate predecessor appeal for shorter speeches in the chamber. Well, you know, things don't change very much. Short speeches, concentrated, well-argued, are far more effective. And I know that applies to supplementary questions. The most effective supplementary I ever heard, you know, came from a member who was sitting on the opposition benches. And his supplementary, he rose and he uttered one word. He said, "Why?" I've never seen such consternation on the face of a minister. You know, as Eric Morecambe would say, there's no answer to that. Sir Edward, when I was elected Speaker 5 years ago, I promised to respect the rights of all honourable members, regardless of their office or their lack of office, irrespective of their party, always aware of the supreme duty of the Speaker to safeguard the traditions of this House, and abandoning all previous commitments and content only to serve this House. Those were my aims 5 years ago, and that is a pledge that I again give today. Thank you.
The question is that Miss Betty Boothroyd to take the chair of this House as Speaker. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker-elect, all speakers are elected to speak for and represent this House. And in the modern television age, this responsibility is more daunting than ever before. For example, I understand that today throughout the world, you are not just admired and respected. In Japan, I understand amongst cable television viewers, you have a fervent cult following. In the United States, there is a cable television station that is dedicated to Prime Minister's questions. There's no accounting for taste. And there is no doubt at all who is the star of that show. It is not either the then Leader of the Opposition or indeed the then Prime Minister. It is yourself as Madam Speaker. Total unflappability, your quick wit, which on occasions we admire and on occasions we suffer from, command of the chamber and authority. But I think most of all, what all of us would say who have experienced your chairmanship, your speakership in this House over these past few years, what all of us would say is that most of all, you are genuinely a lover of this Parliament and a respecter of it. You believe in it, you cherish it, you protect its members, and I think that I would speak for everyone here when I say that you have always showed total impartiality, no fear or favour to anyone, and we cannot say any higher praise than that. Whatever aspersions have been cast on the conduct of members, or indeed whatever concerns people feel from time to time as they watch the debates of this House or Prime Minister's questions, no one has ever doubted your dignity, your integrity, or your capacity to do this job well.
Progress on reducing inflation is also a vital precondition of our commitment to take sterling into the exchange rate mechanism of the European monetary system. Our commitment to do so was set out at Madrid. It remains firm, and the conditions for entry remain unchanged. When we join the exchange rate mechanism, it will provide a new framework for interest rate decisions. But even then, no one should suppose it will bring a dispensation from the need for strong domestic monetary control. Indeed, quite the reverse. Commitment to the one will reinforce the commitment to the other. At present, the taxation of married women's income is wholly inconsistent with their role in society. In tax law, their income is still considered to belong to their husbands. The effect of this is twofold. It denies married women any privacy or independence in tax matters, and too often it results in heavier taxation than is fair. Frankly, it is time for the system to go, and go it will from April. In future, a husband and wife will be taxed entirely separately. I propose to introduce a wholly new tax incentive which will reward saving and encourage people to build up a stock of capital. The scheme will work as follows. Every adult will be entitled to one tax-exempt special savings account, or TESA for short. All commercial banks or building societies will be able to offer such an account. The essence of the scheme is to encourage people to save regularly over a 5-year period. The incentive for them to do so is that all the interest earned on their capital will be entirely free of tax, providing only that the capital itself is left undisturbed for the 5-year period.
Whether or not the United Kingdom decides to participate in a move to a single European currency, we will be among those who meet the strict conditions required for entry. The government believes that these conditions provide a valuable framework for setting policy in the medium term. And that means that monetary policy is primarily directed at the maintenance of sterling's parity within the exchange rate mechanism. In due course, we will move to the narrow band of the ERM at the current central rate of 295 Deutschmarks. Since ERM entry was announced in October 1990, sterling has remained within its permitted ERM bands, while interest rates have been reduced by 4.5%. The differential between UK and German interest rates is now at its lowest for a decade. I believe that it is possible, desirable, and indeed prudent to take a substantial step this year towards our goal of a 20p basic rate for all taxpayers. It is neither necessary or desirable that anyone earning more than their personal allowances should start paying income tax at a rate of 25%. With national insurance contributions at top, that means that the government takes 1/3 of every extra pound earned even from the low paid. In my view, that is simply too much, and I believe that we can and should reduce that burden. So I propose this year to cut the rate of income tax by 5p to 20p for the first £2,000 of taxable income. This
I propose to broaden the tax base. I have never disguised my personal view that the coverage of value-added tax in this country is too narrow. Air travel is undertaxed compared to other sectors of the economy. It benefits not only from a zero rate of VAT, in addition, the fuel used in international air travel and nearly all domestic flights is entirely free of tax. A number of countries have already addressed this anomaly. I propose to levy a small duty on all air passengers from United Kingdom airports. This will be set at £5 for departures to anywhere in the United Kingdom and the European Union, and £10 for departures to other destinations. Virtually every other member state in the European Union charges an ad valorem tax on insurance premiums. I propose now to do the same. The rate will only be 3%, among the lowest in Europe, and the tax will apply to most general insurance of risks located in the United Kingdom. For the typical family with motorhome contents and building insurance, this tax will cost about 35 pence a week. There was nothing fair about taxation before we started to make it fairer. During the past 16 years, we've cut the basic rate by around 1/4 to 25%, and we've abolished all rates of income tax above 40%. But in the longer term, of course, we have a clear and achievable goal for income tax, moving to a basic rate of 20% as soon as we can. There were many who doubted the credibility of our goal of a 20p basic rate when we first set it out in 1992. We're now making big strides towards achieving it. My final proposal in this budget is therefore to reduce the basic rate of income tax by 1 penny to 24 pence in the pound. We have a clear commitment to the 20 pence basic rate. We believe in it and we can achieve it.
In place of welfare, there should be work. So today, this budget is taking the first steps to create the new welfare state for the 21st century. So it is time for the welfare state to put opportunity back into people's hands. So we will create a new ladder of opportunity that will allow the many, by their own efforts, to benefit from opportunities once open only to a few. A job with an employer, work with a voluntary organisation, work on the environmental task force, and for those without basic qualifications, the chance of full-time education or training. With these new opportunities for young people come new responsibilities. There will be no fifth option to stay at home on full benefit. So when they sign on for benefit, they will be signing up for work. Benefits will be cut if young people refuse to take up the opportunities.
One thing is very clear about the budget. When the Prime Minister said before the election, and I quote, "We've no plans to increase tax at all," he did not mean a word of it. That is clear. Because this is a tax-raising budget. And as we look at the budget of this administration and future budgets, we must always remember that rarely, if ever, has a government had such cause to be grateful to its predecessor for the state of the economy it has inherited. Every serious commentator agrees. We have bequeathed to this government the strongest set of economic circumstances within the lifetime of my generation. The longest period of sustained low inflation for 50 years, the lowest mortgage rates for 30 years, the lowest taxes of any major European country, which they have now begun to increase. And we on this side of the House can certainly agree with the objectives of his welfare to work scheme. It is hard to think of any objective more worthy, and we will want to look carefully at the details of some of what he has proposed. But I should remind him that the last government had a welfare to work programme, and it worked. Unemployment among the under-25s fell by 100,000 a year every year for the last 4 years. 400,000 in the last 4 years. 100,000 a year. And we did that without a windfall tax, without a tax on prices, without a tax on pension funds. Unemployment in Britain today is among the very lowest of the major European economies. That is what a policy of flexible markets and welfare reform has already yielded.
Of course, many of the most memorable speeches in the House of Commons have been delivered by whoever happened to be living in number 10 Downing Street at the time, or for that matter, at number 11 Downing Street, the Chancellor's official residence. Who can ever, for example, forget Margaret Thatcher's emotional and defiant swan song on Europe? But there have been many other memorable speeches by all kinds of people in the House of Commons. For example, Robin Cook, when he was still in opposition, and his forensic taking apart of the Scott report on the arms to Iraq affair. And backbenchers, too, have made their contributions. There was George Galloway's passionate stance on Iraq, and also the sad farewell by Eric Heffer when he intervened in the debate on the Gulf War.
Mr. Attorney Benn.
Many members have said in the course of this debate that it is the gravest crisis that we have faced since 1945, and I share that view. There is nobody in the House who supports the act of aggression by Saddam Hussein against Kuwait. There is nobody, as far as I know, who is other than strongly supportive of the sanctions taken by the United Nations against Saddam Hussein and the resolution for its enforcement. We have something else in common. None of us will be killed if a war breaks out. Now, I will use plain language. I fear that the United States has already decided that when it is ready, it will create a pretext for a war against Iran. That is what I believe. I acquit the Foreign Secretary of being in that hawkish clan, because insofar as one can penetrate the inscrutable corridors of power and their inhabitants, he seems to be a bit of a dove. But let me say this too, without offence. Britain is a minor player in this game. I am opposed to a war against Iraq. I am opposed to action outside the United Nations. I believe it would divide the Security Council. I believe it might not exactly unite the Arab world, but might bring many Arab countries together against us. And I think the outcome of such a war could not be sure. If we're going to war, and there are those who think we might, what are our war aims? Not an unreasonable question. Is it to free Kuwait? Is it to topple Hussein? Is it to destroy Iraqi weapons? My right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, went further, actually, than the Prime Minister in setting the objective. Is it to arrest Saddam Hussein and bring him to an international war crimes tribunal? That Prime Minister said that on television. Are you going to send British troops in to fight until you've clarified what it's about? The government has never made it clear. The answer is, it is for the reason I gave. The United States, having helped to arm Saddam Hussein, is determined to bring him down and establish a base. Now, the consequences of war, I don't have to dwell on. Massive loss of life, possibly an air attack on oil installations. And I say this in the peculiar circumstances of it, you would in some senses, not in every sense, be taking on Islam. And anyone who goes into the lobby tomorrow night, and I say this to my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, will be endorsing the view that there is no further action that would legalise or be needed to legalise an attack upon Iraq.
So it isn't a question of being on the side of Saddam. I just want this House to bear this in mind. Some of us spent a long time in the forces in the last war. Some had very distinguished records. Some of us, not so distinguished records. It really doesn't matter. What we bear in mind is that we lost a lot of our friends. I'll never forget them. It's emotional to me because I remember them now. Youngsters I went to school with. And I've lived on borrowed time like all of us who were in the forces, and civilians, incidentally. Just look what happened to our cities. London, Liverpool, Coventry, Belfast. Yes, what happened to our cities in that last war? The destruction that took place. The killings of thousands and thousands of innocent people. We had to fight that war, yes. But Hitler is not Saddam. And Saddam is not Nasser. At least Nasser was somebody who believed in a genuine united Arab nation. Saddam is not in that category. It doesn't mean that we then have to get into a position where we want to see a war come about because we think that's the only answer. I do not believe that. I passionately do not believe that it is the only answer. The answer, as far as I'm concerned, is to actually begin to talk, to negotiate, in order to find... I'm an old shop steward. Whenever I went into a battle, I made certain we had a bloody door ready to be opened. Otherwise, if you close that door behind you, you never sometimes got out of a situation. You had to have a door ready that could be opened. I believe we have to have a door ready in this situation that can be opened. A door that can give him some chance of saving some of his face in order that we can solve the problem by negotiation and not by war. Because if it's by war, who knows where we're going to end up in the end? I don't know. No one knows. Maybe it would be over quickly. Maybe it would be like the Galtieri situation. They would be destroyed and so on. No, I'm not giving way, comrade. I'm not giving way. This may well be my last speech in this House of Commons. I don't know. What I'm saying is this, that as far as I'm concerned, we have to talk in terms of trying to find a solution without going to war. And I agree totally with what my right honourable friend on the front bench has said, and my honourable friend from Chesterfield. There should be no question of going to war unless there has been an agreement by the whole of the United Nations. And that's the thing that we should all agree on, if we can't agree on everything else.
Mr. George Galloway.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister twice mentioned the words diminish and degrade. I wonder if he thought, as I did at lunchtime, as the bleeding women and children were carried into hospitals, that those who were diminished and degraded were not the Iraqis, but us. Diminished and degraded by being reduced to being a tail on this verminous and mangy desert fox. This is a free Parliament, and I will have my say in it. I will have my say in it. The Prime Minister mentioned Ramadan. He thrice said that it would have been wrong to begin military action during Ramadan. He has not said that it will not continue during Ramadan. Will he assure the House on that point? And what does he think opinion in the 1,000 million strong Islamic community around the world will be as they begin Ramadan this weekend, that an Arab Muslim capital is in flames at the hands of a new crusade, but this time led not by Richard the Lionheart, but by Clinton the Liar? And why didn't he find time to mention that 3 out of the 5 members of the Security Council, 3 out of the 5 members, including our sister socialist government in France, have condemned this escapade, and that the General Secretary of the Arab League has today, on behalf of the Arab League, the Arab countries, denounced it as an Anglo-American aggression.
We talk about ethical foreign policy. This is an unethical thing to do. Why? Because wholly innocent people will be killed. And don't pretend that just because Saddam has killed people, we've killed far more Iraqis than Saddam has done. We've killed 200,000 in the war. And therefore, this argument isn't a credible argument. And I had, 100 telephone calls overnight, and the sense of disappointment that was expressed by people who had voted Labour was the strong, not hostility or anger of a kind I may be expressing, but a sense of disappointment. They didn't think a Labour government would break the Charter of the UN and go along with the President of the United States. And you see, the hypocrisy of this upsets me. I'm not prepared, when I hear President Clinton speak, to see him with wings and a halo. He is a superpower, just like Britain was in the 19th century. And what we are witnessing in this is the return of Victorian imperialism, only Britain's so weak, we have to piggyback. Wait a minute, we have to piggyback on top of the American superpower military in order to do it. The overwhelming majority of people in the House want the bombing, favour the bombing, praise the bombing, I think it's wrong. And I'm not going to apologise to the House for thinking it's wrong, because I do believe that there are people today who woke up widows, orphans and parentless because of last night's bombing. And it'll happen again. And last time we did it, Saddam got stronger. The time before, Saddam got stronger. Not the way to deal with it. The history of this has to be read again. We armed Saddam. We cut Kuwait away from Iraq. The Americans provided chemical weapons for them. It's all in the records. They supported him up to the hilt. And I think we just want to be careful that we don't get swept away on this media wave where every bombing is now a spectacle. You go over to the test match in Australia and then the next picture is Baghdad burning. And the Honourable Gentleman and I on a television programme last night, come on, is that a bomb? Is that a missile? What do you think, calling in a pilot? How did you feel when you went in and bombed? It's an absolute defiance of human nature to try and resolve matters that way. And the more dangerous the world is, and it is more dangerous than it was, because anyone can make chemical weapons. Don't have to be a superpower to have chemical weapons, or you do to have nuclear weapons. The more danger it is, the more important it is to stick to the rule of law.
Mr. Robin Cook.
The first charge against his government is that in the 2 years before that Gulf War, they had helped to equip that war machine. And in 2 years, provided hundreds of millions of pounds of machine tools straight to the factories that made the weapons. Because they knew what the machine tools were for. The machine tools, they knew. The machine tools were pre-programmed. They were pre-programmed for munitions factories. The Iraqis sent specifications of what they wanted from those machine tools. They were programmed to provide fuses and casings for the shells. There is no question of these machine tools providing dual purpose. There was only one purpose and one purpose only that they could have been used for. I notice that the honourable members in tabling their amendment have accused us of sensationalised disclosures. Well, I have to say, if we've been sensational, it is only in that we have published the documents of ministers themselves' own meetings. We have published the documents that show what ministers have done. Having said that, I would not disagree with their own choice of word. The picture that emerges from those documents is of ministers first arming one of the world's most brutal regimes and breaking their own guidelines to do it. And I would agree with the honourable bench opposite that that is sensational. And the government knew it was sensational. We know it's sensational because when this document was first produced in 1989, it was unclassified. In December 1990, in handwriting, it is marked restricted. Why? Would somebody on the government bench like to tell us why? It was not as if this document was going to be of any value to our enemy in the Gulf War. Saddam knew what we had provided. Indeed, he knew what we provided rather more than the British Parliament knew what we had provided. The reason why, of course, it was reclassified was because at that point, the government became embarrassed at the major role Britain had played, rebuilding a war machine that British troops had to fight. We did not just arm his forces, we paid for them into the bargain. And I hope nobody today is going to claim that it was right to approve these exports on commercial grounds. Because judged as a commercial decision, the decision to approve these exports was a disaster for which the British taxpayer is still paying. Reading the documents, you become persuaded that the problem that ministers perceived was not that Saddam might use the machines to make weapons. The problem they were really worried about was that the public might find out what they were deciding. Until 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister really believed that his ministers had always observed the guidelines. He was really shocked when one of his former ministers had to say something different in court 2 weeks ago. Prime Minister's defence is well known. It is simple, if rather inelegant. Nobody told him. I'm driven to wonder, did he never ask why nobody told him? Has he had in any of his officials since Alan Clarke's appearance in court and asked them why they didn't tell him what was going on? Which brings us to the third charge against his government. First, the arms had him. Then, when he used those arms against a British ally, they covered up the fact that they provided the arms. And thirdly, as the cover-up unravelled, they were willing to see go to prison 3 executors of Matrix Churchill rather than owners. Let us be quite clear about the purpose of these certificates. The parent certificate, as is acknowledged by the President in his certificate, is the one from the Minister of State at the Foreign Office. In its opening paragraph, that certificate says, "The purpose of this certificate is to explain to the Court why, for reasons of public interest, such documents should not be so disclosed." Over the page it says, "The production of such documents would be injurious to the public interest, and that it is necessary for the proper functioning of the public service that the documents should be withheld from production." It's quite plain what was the intention behind that certificate. It was to persuade the judge not to disclose the documents. There would be no pretense about the purpose of the certificates. They were submitted with the purpose and in the hope that these documents would not become public property. And I pose a final question. Suppose Judge Smedley had accepted the argument in these certificates. Suppose he had decided that disclosure was contrary to the public interest. Suppose he had not released these documents to the defence and the 3 businessmen had been convicted. Would the right honourable gentlemen on the benches opposite us be confident they had done the right thing? Could they persuade themselves that they behaved honourably when those 3 executives went to prison? And if they do not answer that question to this House, it is a question they must answer to their own conscience. These are the documents that have convinced the nation that it is not the executives of Matrix Churchill who should have been in the dock, but the ministers who approved what they were doing and who deserted them when they were caught. We have given Parliament the opportunity to return its verdict on the conduct of those ministers. And tonight, we shall vote to record our contempt for the ministers who misled the House, deceived the public, and tried to muzzle the courts.
Let me remind the House of the background circumstances. In 1990, Iraq was purchasing industrial and dual-use equipment in the world market from a wide range of countries, including the United States, West Germany, Japan, France, and Switzerland. This group of ministers, decided to recommend to their colleagues in government that a collective decision be taken to revise policy, although not to permit the export of lethal equipment. And this same group of ministers also concluded that any change should be announced to Parliament. I must say to the honourable member, he has made one of many grave allegations today that when the facts are fully revealed, it will be clear that ministers had no intention of announcing this to Parliament. I merely wish to tell him that he is absolutely wrong. It is merely the honourable member gave an impression of what was in certain documents which he cannot have read, and he's diametrically wrong. As I happen to have read the documents, I'm telling him that I'm diametrically right. I want now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to come to my suggestion that my right honourable friends and I sought to cover up the evidence that was available to us in our departments. And this suggestion, which has been widely repeated in the national press, is that we were prepared to see innocent men convicted rather than expose the government to the risk of criticism. If for no other reason, the Scott inquiry is essential to establish the facts in these matters. The charge against ministers is that they tried to conceal the facts from the court. That is the charge against ministers. I did not try to conceal the facts from the court. That is the responsibility that I bear, and I have no doubt whatsoever that that matter will be fully, I'm not giving way. I've given way to the honourable member several times. I have no doubt whatsoever that this matter will be exhaustively explored by Lord Justice's inquiry, and properly so. No one should doubt the government's immediate response in setting up an inquiry under Lord Justice Scott. And yet there is a political dimension that has clouded the atmosphere in which this affair has been conducted over the past few weeks. There is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, a nauseating hypocrisy that has flavoured the remarks and the behaviour of the party opposite.
Yes, the Commission does want to increase its powers. Yes, it is a non-elected body, and I do not want the Commission to increase its powers against this House. So, of course, we are differing. Of course, the chairman or the president of the Commission, Mr. Delors, said at press conference the other day that he wanted the European Parliament to be the democratic body of the community. He wanted the Commission to be the executive, and he wanted the Council of Ministers to be the Senate. No. 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 Perhaps the Labour Party would give all those things up easily. Perhaps they would agree to a single currency, to total abolition of the pound sterling. Perhaps, being totally incompetent with monetary matters, they'd be only too delighted to hand over the full responsibility, as they did to the IMF, to a central bank. The fact is, they have no competence on money, no competence on the economy, so yes, the right honourable gentleman would be glad to hand it all over. But what is the point in trying to get elected to Parliament only to hand over your sterling and to hand over the powers of this House to Europe? This government will continue to take a positive and constructive approach to the future of Europe. We welcome economic and monetary cooperation. Indeed, no other member state has gone further than Britain in tabling proposals for the next stage, including the hard ECU. But our proposals would work with the market and give people and governments real choice.
I'm most grateful to the Prime Minister. Will she tell us whether she intends to continue her own personal fight against a single currency and an independent central bank when she leaves office?
No, she's going to be the governor.
On the present structure,
Order. The Prime Minister.
what a good idea. I hadn't thought of it. But if I were, there'd be no European Central Bank accountable to no one, least of all to national parliaments. Because the point of that kind of European Central Bank is no democracy, taking powers away from every single parliament and being able to have a single currency and a monetary policy and an interest rate which takes all political power away from us. As my right honourable friend said in his first speech, after the proposal of a single currency is about the politics of Europe. It is about a federal Europe by the back door. So I'll consider the honourable gentleman's proposal. Now, where were we? I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying this. Mr. Speaker, I was on.
You can wipe the floor with
I was talking about Europe. All the evidence, I believe, indicates that while our people want Britain to be actively involved in Europe, and of course I was the Prime Minister who enabled the Channel Tunnel to get going, so I do believe in having more to do with Europe. I believe our people do not want to see a massive extension of the powers of Brussels into every corner of national life, even if it is dressed up as a step-by-step approach, a kind of federal Europe achieved by stealth. So I fully support the firm stand which my right honourable friends have
Order. Mrs. Thatcher.
Second point, Mr. Speaker, we should, thank you very much, we should not let those who support a federal Europe pretend that they are somehow more European than the rest of us. They are not. They're just more federal. When my right honourable friend is negotiating in Maastricht, it will undoubtedly be a very tense and hard negotiation. He's already said that there are some proposals which are quite unacceptable to the government, and he's pointed out which they are. And his task will be to remove those proposals before he comes back to this House. In my day, Mr. Speaker, in my day, that would have required the occasional use of the handbag. Now it will be, doubtless, the cricket bat, but that's a good thing because it will be harder. The history of our dealings with the European community seems to consist of our conceding powers, of reassurances being given about their limits, of those limits being breached, and then of the European community coming back with a new set of demands for more power for the Commission. Mr. Speaker, that is the conveyor belt to federalism. And that conveyor belt will not be stopped just by removing the word federal from the treaty. Now, faced with this, I believe that the majority of the British people do not want to hand over substantially more powers to the European community. And I believe that our objective must be to uphold the sovereignty of Parliament, which has served us so well.
I was going to quote from my right honourable friend, the member for Finchley, who said in her speech, it would bind and fetter parliamentary sovereignty in practice. I agree with her entirely. It would. And I see no reason to change that view or her view at this moment or in the future. I do not believe in referenda as a means of government. And so,
I know that I inherited that position from him, and I loyally upheld it. Now, may I ask him now, it looks to me as if three parties are going to be for a single currency and for sacrificing a great deal of work which has previously been the right of Parliament. How are the people to make their views known in the absence of choice? That was the particular point, and he will remember that his right honourable friend and mine, the noble Lord Hailsham, made a very interesting speech on elective dictatorship. I can therefore say that he's been in this House longer than I have, how people can make their views known when all parties take the same view, but each is divided.
This is an occasion which constantly occurs in parliamentary history. In fact, such a limited vocabulary. They can make their views known in a variety of ways, as we all know perfectly well. And they can judge the candidates on other questions quite apart from that. And if all three parties are united on the question of a single currency, then I said if they are united, then the party as a whole, I'm not talking about the lower gangway, then of course it's open to them to judge on the merits of the particular candidates as to who they want to return.
In the exceptional circumstances of last week, we were obliged to suspend our membership of the exchange rate mechanism. In the circumstances, there was no choice. The mechanism, no mechanism, could have survived the market attack on the scale that occurred last Wednesday. One after another, not just sterling, one after another, the currencies of Europe came under fire. And we need to see that against the background of events worldwide. And a market, Madam Speaker, encouraged by injudicious comments about realignment that should never have been made, then turned upon sterling. In such circumstances, there can be only one response: to defend the pound with foreign exchange reserves and then to raise interest rates. That is what we did. But the severity of the attack compelled us to leave the mechanism. and other currencies too have come under attack and suffered varying degrees of damage. I don't wish to understate the consequences of this event. Let me turn first to the exchange rate mechanism itself. I do not see myself that we could readily return to the mechanism without dealing with the problems that have been thrown up in the last fortnight. These need careful examination, consideration, before we can decide whether such a mechanism can be made to work to the benefit of all the members of the mechanism. Some fundamentalists say that it can't. Other fundamentalists say we should pop straight back in. Let me say bluntly to the House that I have no intention of being bound to either course without a proper examination of where future British interests lie. But I do not believe that we shall be able to go back into the mechanism soon, or into the same mechanism that we left last week.
The Prime Minister explained the tragicomic events which saw our humiliating withdrawal of the ERM, I suppose, in a very simple terms. He said we were scuppered by the speculators. That's all we're going to get by way of explanation from this government. But what has occurred in the course of the last week or so is not just an upset for the government's economic policy, but the complete destruction of what they claimed was a total political and economic strategy to which the Prime Minister himself could not have been more closely committed. After all, it was only a few weeks ago that the Sunday Times carried the story that the Prime Minister had a new vision of the future. He had, it is said, revealed to his colleagues and party supporters that his ambition was no less than to see the pound replace the Deutschmark as the most stable currency of the whole European community. Now, the response to this plan to topple the Deutschmark was mixed. Eyebrows were raised at the time amongst our recession-weary public. The more generous thought it was a case of audacity straining the bounds of credulity, while others thought the Prime Minister had simply taken leave of his senses. An acid comment from Goldman Sachs in their International Bonds and Forex Bulletin, probably the Speculator's Journal, published on the 3rd of August, said as follows: assuming the Sunday Times headline of "Major aims to make sterling best in Europe" is not some brand of morbid humour that we fail to grasp, it is worthwhile considering whether this is likely to happen. It went on. The Prime Minister certainly has his work cut out. Much the same as Eddie the Eagle had in attempting to win the gold at the Winter Olympics a few years ago. We have a government whose economic policy is in tatters, whose credibility is blown, whose incompetence has been exposed. And it will no longer do to blame others, and it will no longer do to say that their policies will, given time, come right. They have been in power for the longest continuous period in post-war Britain. And as they assent to that proposition, they must accept that they are the only architects, the sole constructors of our present dismal situation. In the course of a few weeks, the one policy with which the Prime Minister was uniquely and personally associated, the contribution to policies of which he appears to have been most proud, has been blown apart, and with it has gone forever any claim by the Prime Minister or the party he leads to economic competence. He is the devalued Prime Minister of a devalued government.
The Cabinet has concluded that since we wish to see the enlargement proceed, progress on qualified majority voting was sufficient to be acceptable until 1996. We are informing the Presidency that provided the concessions made to the UK and Spain are accepted without qualification by other member states, the United Kingdom can accept this interim proposal. Enlargement will bring into the Union countries which share Britain's open trading instincts and which will be net contributors to the budget. It will be another step towards the wider, less centralised, open trading Europe for which we have been working.
No objective observer believes that this so-called compromise has achieved anything of real value for the United Kingdom. And as of now, my right honourable friend has no authority, credibility or identifiable policy in this vital area of policy. Why doesn't he stand aside and make way for somebody else who can provide the party and the country with direction and leadership?
Bring on the white coats! Bring on the white coats!
I think anybody listening to what my honourable friend has had to say, not just today, but at any time over the last 2.5 years, would in no sense suggest that my honourable friend was an objective observer of any matters relating to the European community. And I remind my honourable friend that it might be a useful novelty if from time to time he was prepared to support the government he was elected to support.
I believe it's quite wrong to write off the single currency at this stage. Absolutely wrong. Because the French and the Germans are determined to go ahead with it, and so are some of the other countries. Now, what I think is happening here is that we are completely ignoring the advice and wishes of our industry. And it horrifies me that our party, above all, should ignore history. The CBI has a large majority of people who want a single currency. And that is true of industry generally, not so much of the small traders who are internal, because they're not affected greatly by it. But my right honourable friend, the former Prime Minister, is right to emphasise the dangers of it. If it doesn't go properly, naturally that is so. And the dangers are for us in this country as well. If it goes well and we are not in it, because then we shall get the speculators working against us, and as they did on Black Wednesday, they will be successful.
It was also simple for the Prime Minister before the last election. Perhaps he recalls his article in The Sun in April '97. My love for the pound. An exclusive by Tony Blair. Tony Blair last night declared for the first time he loves the pound.
Unrequited love!
He admitted, I know exactly what the British people feel when they see the Queen's head on a £10 note. I feel it too. He didn't think it was a joke at the time. There are, he said, emotional issues involved in the single currency, and he spoke about his passion for the pound. Has it not been a remarkably short journey from this love of the pound to the plan that he's announcing today to adopt the euro and abolish the pound? And is it not the case? Is it not the case that he has today committed the country to a course of action that is unnecessary, expensive and time-consuming, and for which the British voters have never given their consent? Isn't it the case that instead of giving people a choice, his national changeover plan is part of a national handover plan to hand over the economic and political freedoms of this country before we've even seen whether the single currency works, let alone works for this country? He wants to bounce the British people into joining the euro by spending tens of millions of pounds on their money on convincing them that it's inevitable. He says it's not inevitable, but this whole process is designed to make it inevitable. He wants to change the cash registers, change the computers, change the banking systems, so that he can turn around to the British people and tell them they've no choice but to change their currency. Doesn't it add up to a strategy of pretending to give the people a choice while steadily denying and diminishing that choice? Is it not an attempt to lull people into thinking that a nation that has decided its own destiny for 1,000 years is no longer fit to do so? He has built his career. He has built his recent career on being all things to all people, on reassuringly facing in one direction while heading off in another. It is the trick he has perfected, and he has now surpassed himself. While he trumpets his love for the pound, it is his love for the euro which is the love that dare not speak its name.
Statement to Prime Minister.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected. This decision has been reached amicably, and they will both continue to participate fully in the upbringing of their children. Their Royal Highnesses will continue to carry out full and separate programmes of public engagements, and will from time to time attend family occasions and national events together. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, though saddened, understand and sympathise with the difficulties that have led to this decision. Her Majesty and His Royal Highness particularly hope that the intrusions into the privacy of the Prince and Princess may now cease. The House will wish to know that the decision to separate has no constitutional implications. The succession to the throne is unaffected by it. The children of the Prince and Princess retain their position in the line of succession, and there is no reason why the Princess of Wales should not be crowned Queen in due course.
Order. Minister to make a statement. Dr. John Reid.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I doubt that anyone who has not gone through the awesome experience of war can ever truly imagine its effects on the emotions of human beings. But for some of us soldiers, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and their families, there has been neither glory nor remembrance. Just over 300 of them died at the hands not of the enemy, but of firing squads from their own sides. They were shot at dawn, stigmatised and condemned, a few as cowards, most as deserters. The nature of those deaths and the circumstances surrounding them have long been a matter of contention. Can I make it plain, Mr. Deputy Speaker? We cannot and do not condone cowardice, desertion, mutiny, or assisting the enemy, then or now. All of these are absolutely inimical to the very foundation of our armed forces. Without military discipline, the country could not be defended, and this is never more important than in times of war. However, the circumstances of the First World War and the long-standing controversy about these executions justify particular consideration. We have therefore reviewed every aspect of the cases. We have considered the legal basis for the trials, Field General Courts-Martial, and the review has confirmed that procedures for the courts-martials were correct, given the law as it stood at the time. However frustrating, the passage of time means that the grounds for a blanket legal pardon on the basis of unsafe conviction just do not exist. We have therefore considered the cases individually. I have accepted legal advice that in the vast majority of cases, there is little to be gleaned from the fragments of the stories that would provide serious grounds for legal pardon. 80 years ago, when witnesses were available and the events were fresh in their memories, this might have been a possibility. But the passage of time has rendered it well nigh impossible in most cases. And so, if we were to pursue the option of formal legal pardons, the vast majority, if not all, cases would be left condemned either by an accident of history, which has left us with insufficient evidence to make a judgment, or even where the evidence is more extensive, by a lack of sufficient evidence to overturn the original verdicts. And on the basis of the evidence, we cannot distinguish between those who deliberately let down their country and their comrades in arms and those who were not guilty of desertion or cowardice. But current knowledge of the psychological effects of war, for example, means that we now accept that some injustices may have occurred. Suspicions cannot be completely allayed by examination of the sparse records. We have therefore decided also to reject the option of those who urged us to leave well alone and to say nothing. To do nothing in these circumstances would be neither compassionate nor humane. If some men were found wanting, it was not because they all lacked courage, backbone, or moral fibre. Among those executed were men who had bravely volunteered to serve their country. Many had previous good and loyal service. In a sense, Mr. Deputy Speaker, those executed were as much victims of this war as the soldiers and the airmen who were killed in action or died of wounds or disease, as the civilians killed by aerial or naval bombardment, or those lost at sea. And as the century draws to a close, all of them deserve to have their sacrifice acknowledged afresh. I ask members of the House, therefore, to join with me in recognising those who were executed for what they were, victims with millions of others of a cataclysmic and a ghastly war. Finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is one remaining thing as we look forward to the new millennium. The death penalty is still enshrined in our military law for 5 offences, including misconduct, inaction and mutiny. I can tell the House today that Defence Ministers will invite Parliament to abolish the death penalty for military offences in the British Armed Forces, in peace and in war. In remembrance of those who died in the war, the poppy fields of Flanders became a symbol for the shattered innocence and the shattered lives of a lost generation. May those who were executed, with the many, many others who were victims of war, finally rest in peace. And let all of us who have inherited the world which followed remember with solemn gratitude the sacrifices of those who served that we might live in peace.
If ministerial responsibility means anything, it must mean that his policy is judged against the operation of that policy. For how else can we judge a policy? Policy is not some intellectual abstract. Policy can only be judged by whether it has good or bad effect. Judge Stephen Truman, Mr. Deputy Speaker, said earlier this year that the prison service faced a crisis of confidence. That crisis has grown worse since he spoke those words. Is indeed it any wonder that the service is in crisis? It has no effective leadership. The Secretary of State provides none. Indeed, he does not even pretend to provide any, because he says he is not responsible for the operation of the service. The Secretary of State continues blithely to refuse to acknowledge any responsibility for this crisis. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the question before this House today goes way beyond the employment of one man, the former prison governor of Parkhurst. It goes to the heart of whether this country should be governed by ministers who are ready to tell the truth and the whole truth of the conduct of their high office. Whether they are properly to hold themselves responsible for the decisions in which they are involved. The distinction which the Secretary of State has sought to make between policy for and the operation of the prison service is, in the words of the Chief Inspector of Prisons, bogus. The Secretary of State has been involved in operational decisions day by day, month by month. He has evaded his responsibilities to this House. He has not been frank with this House. In our judgment, he must go.
What we have seen this afternoon, and indeed for the whole of this week, is a cheap and tawdry attempt to make to make petty party political capital out of the difficulties of the prison service. I made a statement to this House about the report, the independent report by General Sir John Lamont on one of the most wide-ranging reviews of prison security which has ever been conducted. That report followed two of the most serious operational failures in the history of the prison service. It is a devastating report. It severely criticises Parkhurst and its management. It says that at Parkhurst the security manual of the prison service was disregarded and the most basic security procedures were not observed. It also makes the most trenchant criticisms of the management of the prison service generally. And it concludes with the following words: "There is an abundance of excellent people within the prison service whose most fervent wish is to do a good and excellent job. They are yearning to be led to better things. Although much has been done to improve the corporate planning within the service, this inquiry has starkly illustrated the need to address urgently shortcomings in leadership, operations and security." It was impossible, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for me to overlook the serious criticisms contained in that report. Of course, I took into account the lengthy submissions which the former Director General put to me and which he's now made public, including his criticisms of the independent Lamont report. I had to choose between the view of the former Director General and the independent views of General Lamont. I concluded that a change of leadership was required at the top of the prison service in order to address what General Lamont described as the shortcomings in leadership, operations and security. So I decided that the Director General's appointment should be terminated. My position, and that of all previous Home Secretaries, is perfectly consistent and clear. I am personally accountable to this House for all matters concerning the prison service. I am accountable and responsible for all policy decisions relating to the service. The Director General is responsible for day-to-day operations. The distinction between policy and operations is also reflected in the framework document which established the prison service as an executive agency. The framework document says that the Director General of the service is responsible for the day-to-day management of the prison service. It also says that the Director General is accountable directly to me for the prison service's performance and operations, and that although the Home Secretary will not normally become involved in the day-to-day management of the prison service, he will expect to be consulted on the handling of operational matters which could give rise to grave public or parliamentary concern. I do not imagine, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that any member of this House will argue that the Parkhurst escape was not in that category. When I received Sir John's report, I studied it very carefully. If the criticisms in that report had been made of me, I should not be standing at this dispatch box today. I now turn, Mr. Deputy Speaker, very specifically and directly to the many inconsistent and unfounded allegations which have been made this week about my conduct. Many people will think it extraordinary that the day after the publication of such a devastating report concerned with the security of our prisons, the Leader of the Opposition chose to concentrate not on security, not on escapes, but about allegations about the treatment of the former Governor of Parkhurst. Given these stringent and utterly damning criticisms, I find it hard to understand how anyone could question the decision to remove Mr. Marriott from his duties at Parkhurst without delay, or to suggest that he's been used as a scapegoat. And that is the man on whose behalf the Leader of the Opposition has chosen to take up the cudgels. The view of the former Director General on this was perfectly clear. Now, I'm not giving way at the moment. As he stated to the Home Affairs Committee during his appearance on the 18th of January, he said, "It was essential for operational reasons that a change in governor took place immediately so that there was no distraction or confusion and there was clarity as to who was in charge."
Madam Speaker, it is urgently necessary for this House to restore its reputation with the nation. Many of our great institutions are falling into disrepute. And I was wretchedly aware of how many people to whom I talked in the last election uttered the sentiment that politicians of all parties are sleazy, corrupt, and principally concerned with their own interests and survival. Whatever fun the public make of us, no matter how upset the public may be by our decisions, it is still essential for there to be an underlying view that members of this House are just, honourable and truthful. And the higher the office, the greater that imperative. And what did we actually achieve by the dismissal of Mr. Lewis? We had to pay him £220,000 in compensation, in return for which the taxpayer received nothing at all. We had to pay his costs in the sum of £41,000, in return for which the taxpayer received nothing at all. And we had to pay our own costs in the sum of some £16,000 plus. A most unnecessary bill of more than £250,000 was the cost to the general public of my right honourable and learned friend's decision. We severely damaged relations with the private sector, as we found out when we considered the possibility of running an open competition for Mr. Lewis's job, a possibility from which we quickly retreated. We created a false distinction between policy and operations, which has reverberated around the whole of Whitehall, not just the Home Office. We've endured swingeing headlines in the press, not least when the Home Office was ignominiously forced to consent to the judgment on the very day that the Conservative faithful were being rallied at Central Council. We left the prison service without a confirmed leader for 5 months, and we shattered its morale just at a time when things had been going well for 10 months. Manpower and time has been taken up in endless briefings, select committees, not just the Home Affairs Select Committee, but the Public Services Select Committee, and the effects of the whole affair still rumble on. And for all that, did we eliminate disasters from the prison service? Nope. Only a few months later, approximately 541 prisoners were released before the end of their sentence. They didn't even have to break out. The fact is, there were disasters in the service before Lewis, including high-profile escapes, disasters in the service during Lewis, and disasters in the service after Lewis. Quite apart from the merits of the case, the handling was deplorable and personally witnessed by myself, and was the cause of the distress which has now become public knowledge. The former Director General was refused point blank on 2 occasions the opportunity to discuss the basis on which he was being dismissed. There has also been some uncertainty about why the former Governor of Parkhurst was moved from his post on the day that my right honourable and learned friend made his statement, rather than within a few days as the Director General and Operational Director had intended. I have now seen detailed evidence that makes it clear that it was only a transcript of the words used by my right honourable and learned friend to the House, and which was transmitted to Parkhurst, which caused that change. Honourable members will note that there has been much interest in the press this week as to whether or not there was a direct threat from the former Home Secretary to the former Director General that he would have to consider overruling him if, when he had reconsidered his decision, he didn't come to a different view. We know that he was sent out to reconsider his decision. We know that during that time advice was taken on whether or not he could indeed be overruled. Very strange that my right honourable and learned friend refused to answer this question 14 times on Newsnight last week, and was so uncharacteristically tongue-tied that he couldn't explain, as he later claimed, that he was simply unsure about this element of such a traumatic disagreement and that he needed to check the papers. Although it wasn't debated in the House of the 19th of October, questions had been raised in that week as to whether the Home Secretary had not only threatened to overrule Mr. Lewis, but had threatened to sack him. This is 10 months before he was sacked. I can confirm that he did talk about sacking him that day. My right honourable and learned friend has a problem, in that his... in that his first reaction to attack is denial and refuge in semantic prestidigitation. Why didn't he simply come to the House on the 19th of October and say, so what? Why didn't he come and say, yes, I did tell the Director General that Marriott should have been suspended. Yes, I did feel about it so strongly that I put huge pressure on him. Yes, I did tell him to reconsider his decision. And yes, I did consider overruling him. It was just too important not to consider it. Why on earth didn't he say that to what I have no doubt would have been high cheers from the then government benches? Because he couldn't do so. Because he had dug a hole for himself over policy and operations. And he would never have had to dig such a hole had he been prepared to keep the Director General in place. My right honourable and learned friend has made much of how he is the one to take tough decisions. Courage and toughness are both more than instant law and instant dismissal. We demean our high office if we mistreat our public servants. We demean ourselves if we come to this House and indulge in a play of words, which, while statements may not be untrue, because they never are in this House, Madam Speaker, may nevertheless be unsustainable. I have only this to say. I have found doing what I have done today extremely difficult decision to come to. I have agonised over this for months. It was one of the worst moments when I actually decided I was going to do it, and I knew how shocked and how hurt and how upset not only would my right honourable and learned friend be, but also would many of my colleagues be. I came to the view that I could do no other. In the interests of giving very belated justice to Mr. Lewis, to giving some comfort to his wife Louise, who supported him faithfully while he gave us 7 days a week looking after the prison service, to clear to a certain extent my own conscience, although that is my problem. I should have resigned at the time, and I didn't. But yes, I agree. But also to bring to this House, House's attention, the overwhelming necessity that whoever is leader of the opposition, he, together with the new Prime Minister, must clean up the image of Parliament in the eyes of the British people. It is not enough to preserve our own positions at all costs. When we occupy high positions, and certainly when we occupy them in justice departments, justice must be our first concern.
This is a unique agreement born of a unique set of negotiations that involved unionists, nationalists, Republican and loyalists around the same talks table. This is a situation in which, though compromises have been made, everyone can be a winner. Everyone's political and cultural identity is respected and protected by this deal. Northern Ireland politics for so long has been seen as a zero-sum game. This agreement demonstrates the potential for the people of Northern Ireland to move beyond that into a new type of politics in which everyone can gain. This agreement represents a sensible, fair and workable way forward for both communities. Madam Speaker, the main elements in the agreement are, firstly, on constitutional issues, the British and Irish governments have formally resolved our historical differences through the general and mutual acceptance of the principle of consent, which means in Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom and will stay that way for as long as that is the wish of a majority of people who live there. And it means that if the people of Northern Ireland were formally to consent to the establishment of a united Ireland, the government of the day would bring forward proposals in consultation with the Irish government to give effect to that wish. Second part of the agreement, that there will be greater democratic accountability in Northern Ireland through the devolution of a wide range of executive and legislative powers to a Northern Ireland Assembly. In the Assembly, the post of executive authority will be shared out on a proportional basis, and safeguards will be in place to protect the interests of both of the communities. Thirdly, there will be North-South Ministerial Council. It will bring together those with executive authority, North and South, to work together by agreement on matters of mutual interest. Finally, the agreement looks ahead to the creation of a normal and peaceful society in Northern Ireland by establishing a clear process for the decommissioning of illegal weapons that can start forthwith, and a commitment by all the parties to work constructively in good faith with the Independent Commission and to use any influence they have to achieve the decommissioning of all paramilitary weapons within 2 years of the referendum. This agreement, reached on Good Friday, I believe is a significant turning point in the history of Northern Ireland. But let us have no illusions. It will take a long time to repair the physical and the emotional damage of the past and bring around a real sense of reconciliation and partnership. The people there have suffered a great deal of hardship and pain. To their strength, we must give all our support in the weeks and months ahead. There will be pressures on all sides to bring this agreement down. The best way we can help fight these pressures is to give this agreement the overwhelming support of this House, and to give the people of Northern Ireland the chance to choose the future, not the past in which to live. In the end, the decisions rest with the people of Northern Ireland. The choice is theirs.
At approximately 9:15 a.m. yesterday, an armed man identified by police as Thomas Hamilton entered Dunblane Primary School and opened fire on children and staff who were in the school gymnasium. 15 of the children who were shot and their teacher died within the school. 1 child died later in hospital. 3 adults and 12 other children were wounded. The gunman shot himself and died within the school. As soon as I was informed of this dreadful event, accompanied by the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Hamilton, I went to Dunblane, where we were joined by my honourable friend, the Education Minister, the member for Aberdeen South. What we witnessed there encompassed both the worst and the best of which humanity is capable. In contrast to the stark evil of the crime, doctors, teachers, police, ambulance personnel, and other caring professionals, church leaders and volunteers worked unsparingly to save life and console the bereaved. In particular, Madam Speaker, I want to pay the highest possible tribute to Mr. Ron Taylor, headmaster of Dunblane Primary, for his heroic efforts to save the lives of his dying pupils in circumstances too harrowing to be recounted in detail. Honourable members will wish to join me also in a tribute to Mrs. Gwen Mayer, the dedicated teacher who was gunned down in the midst of her charges. Honourable members will share my sense of the inadequacy of any attempt we make in this House to offer consolation to the families devastated by this vile crime. The cold-blooded slaughter of tiny children is beyond atrocity, and I know that I speak for the whole House when I say to the stricken families of Dunblane, our deepest sympathy and our prayers are with you and for you. You have the support of countless people around the world in your grief. Tomorrow night, the people of Dunblane will be holding a vigil for their dead, their injured, and their bereaved. I know I speak for the whole House when I say that the prayers and thoughts of all honourable members will be with them. The whole nation mourns.
Mr. George Robertson.
There'll not be a single person in this country who will have not wakened this morning hoping beyond hope that yesterday was just a very bad dream. So that there's going to be nobody today who won't experience huge sadness and dismay in realizing that it did all happen. You don't need to have lived in the town of Dunblane or to have seen 3 children go through Dunblane Primary School to share the grief and the horror and the sheer desolation that our town feels today. You just have to be a fellow human being. It was that very worst of all possible nightmares that any parent can think of. And for it to happen to so many of the littlest and the most innocent makes the tragedy one of unspeakable misery. I have to say that Dunblane today is worse than yesterday in its mourning, and tomorrow will probably be worse still as the enormity of the massacre comes home in the shape of real children gone, real families afflicted, and a whole community scarred and tortured. Naturally, there are going to be questions to be asked in a nation, never mind a local community, needing answers to them, but the worst service we could do to these infant victims is to rush to instant judgment. And I therefore strongly welcome the decision to appoint a High Court judge of the calibre of Lord Cullen to investigate all the circumstances of yesterday. And of course, those of us who met and distrusted Thomas Hamilton, and I myself argued with him in my own home, in truth, could have had no inkling to guide us to his final act of wantonness. And of course, too, we expect a thorough examination and any necessary action on the present gun laws which enabled such a man to own such a lethal army. And school security, too, will need looking at. But we should not pretend to ourselves that even a fortress would have kept an armed, crazed, suicidal killer at bay. But, Madam Speaker, that is not for today. Today the nation stands beside and with a community devastated by a unique and terrible act of evil. We here, and all of us who would root out the sickness which spawned such an awful act, stand together in mourning and sympathy with those whose loss today is beyond repair.